Let's have the conversation about reparations.
It's a big conversation in California right now.
Big conversation in California. It has been, actually, there are two different reparations measures that are being discussed in California. One, just for the city of San Francisco. The one that just came out this week as far as a recommendation or a suggestion for how much for the state of California. We're talking about $800 billion that would go toward reparations for black residents in California. And the number in San Francisco was also pretty huge. It was came out to about $5 million per person.
Right.
So those numbers are obviously eye-popping for a lot of reasons, depending on your perspective on this. But joining us now to discuss how real those numbers are is someone who is involved in particular in San Francisco's decision-making process. Tanish Hollins is the vice chair of San Francisco's African American Reparations Advisory Committee. And as you can see, also works very closely with Governor Gavin Newsom. So Tanish, welcome to TMZ Live.
Hi, Tanish.
Hello.
Thank you so much for doing this. Can you, I'm sure the calculus here is pretty complicated, but can you kind of give us an overview of how the various commissions and the economists reached those numbers?
So I will start with, I am not an economist, but there are a couple of things that have been taken into consideration. And I'll speak for the San Francisco process. In our San Francisco process, we looked at things like the racial wealth gap. For African Americans, the average income for African Americans in San Francisco is about $39,000. And the median income for a household of one is over $100,000 in San Francisco. It also has to do with the loss of property, racial redlining, and restrictive covenants that took place that kept Black San Franciscans out of opportunities to purchase or had lost their property ownership to eminent domain, as well as like systemic divestment. I know it's a big word for a lot of folks who may be watching, but it basically means when departments and agencies specifically take funds out of Black neighborhoods and communities. There's a lot of loss that takes place there. And so the projected $5 million number speaks a lot to the value of wealth that Black Americans lost out on in San Francisco.
So, Tanish, I guess the number is just so big. I think, we should say that California's annual budget is $300 billion. And so economists thought a number like $800 billion. I'm wondering what the reaction is in San Francisco and also with Governor Newsom to the numbers that have been thrown out.
I can't speak for the governor, but what I can say is the sticker shock is real for all of us, right? And depending on which side of the conversation you're on, as a Black San Franciscan, a Black American, someone who has family members, a descendant of chattel slavery, when you think about the amount of unpaid labor, the way that systems and departments and laws were specifically restrictive to Black Americans and descendants of slavery, I think that number speaks a lot to the amount of harm that has been done to our community. As to whether or not it's realistic, which is the question that often gets asked, if we only have this amount of money, how do we compensate for this amount of money? That is a conversation for the state of California, and for San Francisco, it is a conversation for the city electeds, the board of supervisors, the mayor, folks to look at the city budget and see what they can reasonably accommodate given the amount of funds that could be due. I think the other thing to be mindful of is that reparations is not limited to cash payment. There are other ways to repair harm reparations. So while it could be $800 billion of worth that Black Americans who are descendants of slavery missed out on in California, there are other ways to repair that harm. It could be through land, it could be through specific programs, it could be through cash incentive, but it's not limited to that.
It could be that there are people who believe that reparations are in order, but then it's an issue of the amount. So it feels like this is opening a door where there's going to have to be some kind of compromise, just given the reality of the numbers, it would seem.
I think that when we talk about these big numbers, Let's also be realistic about the amount of money that the government spends every year addressing the harms, the outcomes of the harms that were done specifically to the Black community. We talk about the $50 billion a year in California alone that's spent on the criminal justice system, right? Where you have Black folks who are overrepresented, the issue of public safety and policing, the issue of housing inequities. There are so many disparities that directly impact and reflect the condition of Black Americans, and specifically those who are descendants of chattel slavery, that well past that $800 billion number that was quoted for what can be done to repair the harm. And that's just in California. When we make investments to stabilize Black Americans and the Black community, we have better outcomes for all communities.
One thing I wanted to talk about here is that who is going to get whatever the number ends up being, if this is something that goes through, who ends up getting the money? And it seems like that process can be pretty complicated too.
So we're still working through eligibility criteria, finalizing the eligibility criteria in San Francisco. There will be some proof through public record. There may be some proof that's required through genealogy. Part of the reparations implementation process is going to be making sure the government and also private entities work together so that folks can get access to that kind of documentation to prove eligibility. But the criteria is still in development.
The more we talk, the more it just seems
You
like
realize this is not
some work
something.
cut out.
Yeah, this is not something that's going to happen next year or even the year after, I would think. But I think, like Governor Newsom said, it's important to at least start the conversation, and that is happening in earnest now. So, Tanish, thank you so much for joining us. I have a feeling we'll be in touch. This is something that's going to be going on for a while.
Really grateful that you guys took on this conversation.
We appreciate it. We really appreciate it. It's really interesting.